Hello everybody, I'm Daniel from Foreigner BG, and today in our Expat Stories section, we are with our friend Eric. He will tell us about his experience living here in Bulgaria. How are you, Eric?
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Where are you located, Eric?
So I live in central Sofia, in a historic building in this apartment that I'm in the process of buying with my wife.
Can you tell us a little bit about your nationality and what do you do here in Bulgaria?
So I'm American, even born in Washington, D.C. And, it's funny, people think that I'm here and I chose to be here. I must be, some part Bulgarian and things, but my family is very British, Dutch, a little bit of like French and German in there, just typical white American in the US for like almost 400 years. But I decided to get out here and live in Bulgaria. And today, I run a business. I do a bunch of freelancing. I have my podcast, the Bulgarian History Podcast, and I'm writing a book about the history of the First Bulgarian Empire. And I serve on the board of Fulbright Bulgaria. So I help, build further kind of connections between the United States and Bulgaria for research, for teaching English, for all these kinds of things. So
Can you tell us a little bit about your podcast? There is some people from the Foreigner BG audience that they still don't know your podcast. Can you invite them and what they can find there?
yeah, so it's the history of Bulgaria, right? So all the way from kind of the 4th and 5th century early origins, the Proto-Bulgarians and such, and eventually it's going to go all the way until basically now is the goal. So far, it's been going for about 7.5 years, around I think 137 episodes, and in that time, it's chronological. So we've covered, the early origins and the foundation of the First Bulgarian Empire, and we just finished kind of the April Uprising. We're now talking about the 1877-1878 Russo-Ottoman War, and so we're just about at the moment where the third Bulgarian state is established.
Christo Bote died the other day in the podcast.
Yeah, the few episodes I'm doing right now are very somber. I mean, covering the April Uprising, Hristo Botev's Cheta, and talking about the Batak massacre. I mean, it's very, very sad, very sobering, and it's hard because I don't want the podcast to be too sad, but I need to reflect that these are serious and tragic events where a lot of people who deserve better died difficult deaths and things. But it's about to get a bit more upbeat.
I think your podcast is great because it gives me the opportunity to learn some of the stuff about Bulgarian history that otherwise it would be more difficult for me to learn. I don't need to go to the history books. Anyway, I can read Bulgarian, but it's great to have the opportunity to get the information in English, and I think many other people also will be very happy for this. Where people can find the podcast?
Well, if you Google Bulgarian History Podcast, I'm the only one, so it's very easy to find. bghistorypodcast.com. There's a Facebook page and all that. But yeah, I mean, that's a bit of why I wanted to do it, because I mean, there's a couple books, I've got them right here, that are total broad histories of Bulgaria, but they're just very, very, very light on details and mostly focused on modern history. I mean, most of these books will cover the First Bulgarian Empire, the century and a half of Byzantine domination, and the Second Bulgarian Empire in like 20 pages. Kind of insane. I mean, that's gosh, I'm trying to think. I mean, that's maybe 700 years of history in like a couple pages. So yeah, I wanted to make something that was accessible and interesting, that someone who's not a historian could appreciate, but that was still, trying to apply rigorous academic principles. So, I'm not kind of, I think, exaggerating things. I'm trying to be pretty unbiased and to talk about sometimes, hey, our sources tell us this, but then other sources tell us that. So we're a bit unsure, to be honest, about what I don't know. Because, too many histories, they portray it as like, this is how it happened. And a lot of times it's a little unclear.
But history is not just your passion, it's part of your background and what you have studied.
Yeah, I studied history and political science in college, and then nationalism studies, which is kind of identity building in groups and how all that happened in my master's, and then postgraduate research and publishing papers and presenting at conferences and all that kind of stuff. So I was on the route to be a historian and a professor before I kind of decided to make that a hobby instead of a full-time job just because it's a tough career.
You say that it's a bit of more than 7 years since you have your podcast and so. And why and when did you came to Bulgaria?
So I first came here in, I guess it was August of 2009, which like blows my mind. I mean, it was, a little while ago, reaching the 10-year anniversary, and it's funny. I came here as a student because I had already been interested in Bulgarian history before university. Like in high school, I kind of got a little interested in Bulgaria. And in university, I really wanted to study abroad. I had barely ever left the United States. I was dying to like live in another country, experience that. And I was interested in Bulgaria, and I definitely could not afford to study abroad in, England or Germany or France. A lot of the classic places people study abroad in are very, very expensive. And so it was like I found the American University in Bulgaria, and all the stars aligned. It was in a country I was super interested in. It was very affordable, and it was a great university. And I'm still a huge lover and proponent of AUBG. I'm a kind of a semi alumnus. I didn't graduate from there, but I spent a year there, and I keep close ties with folks from that community. And I think it's just a special university. So kind of all that came together, and I came and lived in Bulgaria for a year, 2009, 2010. And
What was your relation with Bulgaria when you came? It was at love at first sight?
I mean, like, it's funny. People ask us like, oh, didn't you have culture shock and everything? But like, I feel like when I came, I expected everything to be different, and things were different. And I was just like, yeah, cool, interesting. Oh, this is different. I don't know if it was like love at first sight. I mean, when I came here, I was just, everything was so interesting. And I met all these fascinating people from around the world. And, it was a while before I decided, yeah, this is where I want to live. That was really coming back years later, doing my Fulbright research grant. And at that moment, I established myself in Sofia, and I met all these super interesting, dynamic people, particularly a lot of people in the startup scene here who were really just inspiring and enthusiastic about everything that they were doing. And it was at that moment that I was like, okay, I knew Bulgaria was an interesting place to study, but like now I see this is actually a really cool place to have a life and have a career, because suddenly I just saw so many cool projects that I could work on, cool companies I could work with. And it just seemed like so much was happening around me. And, at that point, I always say I've never lived in the US as a normal adult. The last time I lived in the US was as a university student. It's like I've never really experienced the US in the typical way an adult does. I'm not that familiar with it there. And so it seemed like a weird foreign thing. Like I didn't even know where I would begin in the US, but in Bulgaria, I knew what to do. I had those friends, I had those contacts, and, I knew how to start a life here. So I did that.
You don't live in the US, but can you tell us what do you like about the US?
So definitely, people always laugh at me when I say this, but like I miss food, but not just American food. I miss the variety of food, because where I grew up in Northern Virginia, it's an extremely diverse place. Like the people I grew up around were, they or their parents were from, India, Pakistan, Iran, China, Ukraine. I mean, just everywhere. And so when I go back to the US, what do I want to eat? I want to eat Vietnamese food. I want to eat Thai food. I want to eat Ethiopian food. I want to eat Korean food. I want to travel the world culinarily speaking. Although Sofia's come a really long way. Now there's the variety of food available here is so much more than it was 10 years ago. It's like night and day. There's also a lot of amazing nature. I mean, about a year and a half ago, my wife and I went with my brother and my sister-in-law to like Utah and the Grand Canyon, and we got engaged there. And I'd never been out west in the US, and like the nature was, just stunning. And so, and I'm usually not such a rah-rah America kind of person, but like I'm very proud of our music. I think Americans can be very proud of this amazing musical tradition we have, and there's things like that. But yeah, what I miss and what I want to do when I go back to US, besides see friends and family, is usually eat good food and see some nature.
Going back into that, what you see as the biggest difference in between Bulgarian and the US?
I think it's got to be people's attitudes. It's like Americans tend to be very optimistic. I find it's like we have this American dream, like, yeah, everyone can succeed here, and like even though a lot of the Americans I know are pretty skeptical and jaded about a lot of elements of American society, the faults we have in terms of healthcare and voting rights and all these sorts of things. But as a whole, American society is pretty optimistic, even there's some reasons not to be so optimistic. And I've always found that Bulgarians tend to be pretty pessimistic. It's Bulgarian society, it seems often to be very, very jaded and very like, yeah, what's the point, but at the same time, not all Bulgarians are like this, and this is in part why I really liked the friendship groups that I made here, particularly in kind of the startup world and things like that, because those are groups of Bulgarians who were not jaded, who are excited and enthusiastic and really believed that they could make a difference. And there's plenty of Bulgarians out there like that, but still, it's this kind of pessimism and ideas that my wife and I have encountered, that like for a lot of young Bulgarians, the idea is that if you stay in Bulgaria, then you're automatically basically a failure, and that the only way you can succeed as a Bulgarian is to go abroad. And I don't think that's true, and I think it's a kind of a sad perspective to have. So yeah, I see a lot of that kind of pessimism in Bulgarian society, and I hope over time Bulgarians more and more can see that Bulgaria's got its problems, but they're not necessarily that much worse than most other places. And there's a lot of amazing things about this country as well that they should be very proud of.
What do you like about Bulgaria?
I mean, lots of things. There's the obvious things like, nature is beautiful. The nature, it's funny, the nature here is very familiar to me because I spent a lot of my childhood in the Appalachian and Blue Ridge Mountains in Western Virginia. And like the Staroplanina looks exactly like those mountains. When I'm riding around the Staroplanina, like I look around, it's like I could be back home in Virginia. But yeah, I love the history here. I love that when I walk around, I'm just constantly surrounded by, beautiful old remnants of the past. I love that. I love the fresh food you can get here, right? Living near markets and things, and being able to buy your eggs and your peppers and everything from local producers and things. I think you can get fantastic ingredients here. I like that Bulgaria seems like a place where it can be very difficult to do a lot of things, but at the same time, a lot of things are possible if you really work at it. The joke I came up with many years ago is that like the best thing about Bulgaria is that no one cares, and the worst thing about Bulgaria is that no one cares. So it's like on the one hand, it's like you can do a lot of things because everyone's like, yeah, just do it. Yeah, fine. No one's gonna stop you. But on the other hand, sometimes when you really want to get something done, it's like, yeah, we don't really. No one's that interested in helping you make it happen. So to me, I always try to keep both sides of that coin in my mind.
You are from the US, and you have been here already more than 10 years, back and forward. And I want to ask you if you found some problems with the bureaucracy here in Bulgaria. Can you tell us something about that?
I mean, of course, yeah. Like, being an immigrant here is not easy. Initially, like trying to figure out, okay, like how can I live here? What can I do here? That took a lot of figuring out, a lot of talks with lawyers, and a lot of money. I mean, gosh, I've easily spent thousands and thousands of dollars on immigration stuff over the years, but it is possible, and that's one important thing myself and my friends always tell when anyone wants to live in Bulgaria. I think we'll talk about this later, but like, don't just listen to what anyone tells you. Like, hire a lawyer who's a specialist in this, and that is the best and only way to make sure you do everything correctly. But yeah, trying to. It's felt frustrating. Like often, like I'm trying just to, access the healthcare system that I help pay for, or to just get a normal job like anyone else. And it's really, really hard. And, institutions don't talk to each other. I was recently trying to get my driver's license, and I go to COT, the DMV here, and they're like, oh, your address for us is listed as being in the US. What? Like I renew my ID and give my address at Maria Luisa at Mevere every single year, and it's the Department of the Interior. It's the same department you guys are in, but apparently they have completely different systems. And so I had to go through all this stuff to change my address there. But it's like even within a single ministry, you've got different systems where you could just encounter these random kind of problems that lead to weeks-long delays in you getting a document and stuff. But
you got it done? You have your license?
I got my license.
Congratulations. It's not an easy task. Did you change it or you made everything from the very beginning?
So from the very beginning, because I had a driver's license in the U.S. I drove for a few years regularly when I was in my teens and 20s, but my U.S. license, every second time it expires, which is every like 4 or 5 years, you have to renew it in person. You have to physically be there, and I wasn't there. It expired, and at that point, in order to renew my U.S. license, I would have to retake the exam and go through all this stuff again in the U.S. And whenever I'm in the U.S., like I don't have much time. Like I don't have time for that. I'm seeing friends and family and stuff. And so I just didn't have a license for years. And I basically didn't drive a car for like 10 years. So, when I looked at getting one here, it was like, okay, I mean, I probably need to relearn how to drive to an extent, but I didn't know how to drive a manual, a stick shift car. And so I decided like, well, I might as well learn that skill while I'm at it if I have to do, 40 hours of instruction anyways. And
I have another question. Can you share something important that happened to you in Bulgaria?
something important. I mean, in a way, like it's a hard question because it's like about a third of my life has been here. It's just like, can you think of something important that's happened in the last 10 years? It's like, I mean, everything. Obviously I met my wife here. That's very, very momentous and very important. I think in general, it's not necessarily like a singular event, but it's like Bulgaria is where I kind of figured out who I would be. When I first came here, I was 20 years old, and I hadn't decided necessarily what I would study, what my career would be. I was just figuring it out as I went. And to me, it's like the time I spent in Bulgaria, the people I met in Bulgaria, the opportunities I had here, those are what taught me how I would live my life. Because like growing up, I grew up surrounded by that American workaholic culture. Like growing up, my father worked like 90 hours a week. He had his own business, just work. And I saw what a cost that has, how difficult and damaging that kind of lifestyle is. And so, to me, a lot of those earlier years of my life, my goal, my challenge was to figure out how to live a happy and fulfilling life. And so it wasn't necessarily to be successful, to make a bunch of money. I didn't really care that much about all that. I wanted to have a fulfilling life. And it was in Bulgaria that I figured out how I could do that. And that's, doing projects like the Bulgarian History Podcast, which, I feel so incredibly blessed to be able to do that because people love it. And I constantly get people emailing me, thanking me. Oh, this allowed me to learn more about my spouse's culture, or, hey, I'm a Bulgarian descent growing up in Australia or something. And this allowed me to really connect with Bulgaria and learn so much more about it, even though I've maybe been there once or something. Yeah, I mean, from hearing from listeners of the podcast, like those are maybe my two biggest audiences are, people of Bulgarian descent, or even Bulgarians who've moved abroad when they were really young, who are using it to reconnect with Bulgaria, as well as people who are related to somehow Bulgarians, people who married a Bulgarian or something like that, and who want to find a way to, connect more with their partner and to learn more about that culture. And so those are two big groups that I know are listening to the podcast a lot. Yeah, the biggest country by far is the United States, followed by Bulgaria and the UK. But I think like maybe around half of all listeners are in the US, and Bulgaria and the UK are like 15 to 20% each, something like that. Yeah. So, but I think it's also partly just because Americans listen to a lot of podcasts. Like podcasting is a much bigger and more well-known thing, although the Bulgarian podcasting market has developed a lot. Now there's actually a lot of Bulgarian podcasts, but back when I started, there were almost none, I think.
If you have a magic stick and you can change something in Bulgaria, but just one thing, what it will be?
I mean, like the obvious thing is to, fix kind of corruption and fix all the kind of inequities in the political system and economic system here. So to me, like that's the obvious thing, but the less obvious thing would be probably more people's attitudes. What I talked about before is making Bulgarian people a little more hopeful and a little more inspired in believing in themselves and believing that they can in fact change the world around them more than they often think that they can.
Well, there is elections this week, and people will have the opportunity to change things.
Actually, my wife and I will be in the U.S. During that time, so I'm trying to convince her to go to the embassy to vote.
You have been living in Bulgaria more than 10 years, Eric. How is your Bulgarian language going?
It's pretty good. I mean, it's been at a plateau. It's been at the same level for a number of years where, like, I can get by. Like when I go to Mevere Maria Luisa, like I can fill out forms and communicate in Bulgarian just fine. I can talk with my in-laws in Bulgarian and such pretty well, but it always depends on circumstances. Like the other day, we had a plumber come in here to talk to us about some ideas we had for renovation. And in that conversation, I was pretty useless. Like, I don't know any terms for plumbing, or when I'm in the bank, it's like, I just don't know the vocabulary for banking and finance. So, but, it's good enough for me to get by. And that's always been really important because, I've known way too many foreigners who lived in Bulgaria for like 10 years and can barely speak a sentence of Bulgarian. And to me, it's like, come on, really? Like, people always say it's such a hard language. Like, it's medium hard,
Medium hard.
Like I studied Arabic in the past a bit. It is not as hard as Arabic, I've also studied French for many, many years, and like it's probably a bit easier than French, maybe a bit harder than French. But having studied a lot of different languages and such, to me, people suck, like, oh, Bulgarian's so hard. Oh my gosh. It's like, it's not that bad, and it's more useful than people think. If you speak decent Bulgarian, you can understand a lot from other Slavic languages. But be aware they cannot understand you. Like if I'm hanging out with like Czechs or something, like if they're speaking Czech to each other, I can get the gist of what they're saying. But when I start speaking Bulgarian, they have no clue what I'm saying. So it's kind of funny that way, but it's more useful than people think.
Did you study Arabic, you say? Did you know other languages besides English and Bulgarian?
I mean, I studied French for many, many years. I used to speak pretty good French, but now when I try to think of French words, the Bulgarian word comes. But like if I watch a French movie, like it all starts kind of coming back and such. So, and I know a little Hungarian because I lived there for a year to do my master's degree. So I know some basic phrases and words and how to get along in Hungarian.
Which other countries have you been living besides Bulgaria?
Yeah, I've lived also in Hungary. That's the only U.S., Hungary, and Bulgaria. But I've been to almost 50 countries. I mean, I've been to Venezuela and Kenya and Vietnam and Qatar and like all over Europe. I've been around a lot. Morocco. Sadly, the last couple of years I haven't been able to travel very much, but like living in Bulgaria, it becomes very, very easy to travel around it. Yeah, like Qatar Airways really changed the game. Like a couple of years ago when they started flying here, it's like suddenly East Asia just opened up. And I remember right when they started flying out of here, I bought tickets to Vietnam for like, I think it was like in dollars, like $350 or something for round trip tickets from Sofia to Ho Chi Minh City. I was like, oh my, like, that's incredible. So,
do you have any other business besides your podcast that you would like to share with us? That people may contact you? You told me also that you do, for example, voiceovers.
Yeah. So I've got my own company, and through that company, it's like I do professional writing, editing, copy editing, stuff like that. I do a lot of marketing consultations, so I'll help businesses, develop marketing plans, some level of kind of SEO optimization, stuff like that. And I do, voiceover work. I'm always available for that kind of stuff. So, the company is just sort of me and through my contacts. So if you're curious for something like that, probably just get in touch through the podcast. Through me on Facebook, Eric Halsey, or through the Bulgarian History Podcast, you can get in touch with me. But yeah, my business as a freelancer, I do a little bit of a lot of different things.
Bulgarian History Podcast. We're gonna put a link in the description, then the people can go and check it out there. And we have the last question for you, Eric. What if somebody asks you for advice and tells you, I want to move to Bulgaria, but I don't know what to do? What you will say to them? What will use your advice?
So I think it's worth it. Obviously, I think you can have a tremendously fulfilling and interesting life and career here. But, there's an immigration process. I mean, if you're an EU citizen, it's pretty straightforward. You don't really have to worry. But if you're not an EU citizen, number one, step one, hire a lawyer who is a specialist in immigration, because like the immigration laws and rules, they change all the time. They can be very arbitrary. The law can say one thing, but in practice, it's something else. It's like you really need someone with experience in this to guide you through the process. Lots of people will tell you, oh, my friend did it this way, or you can do this. Do not listen to those people. Like, even if they're telling the truth, that person's experience is that person's experience and is not necessarily what you will experience if you try to do the same thing. So kind of be realistic about that and go through all the proper channels and follow a lawyer's advice and do everything the right way. And you'll thank me in the end, but it'll be a process. But besides that, I mean, you can really do so much here, and it's worth it.
I want to thank you, Eric, for taking the time to being with us today to share your experience about your life in Bulgaria with the Foreigner BG audience. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for all you guys do. I know you're a very big resource for foreigners here, and I wish there was a site like yours when I first moved here. It would have been very helpful. So thanks for all you do as well.
If you enjoy this video, don't forget to share and subscribe to Foreigner BG Facebook page and YouTube channel.